Good afternoon and good morning to our listeners over in Europe, as well as a good early morning to anyone in Europe. My name is Ben Garten. I'm the research manager here at BDTI, and we have a wonderful program today that we're very excited to share on using high dimensional corporate governance variables to predict forum performance, which is the name of the paper written by Miyakawa Sensei and Yamanoi Sensei, who are both here to join with us. Before we begin, I'm going to introduce the schedule and just let you know that there is going to be some time for questions that will be at the end. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to please use the chat function such that you are able to give us something that we can ask the professors or to Nick as long as it's on the topic. Today, we will be starting with an introduction of the event, as well as the Board Director Training Institute by Nicholas Benish, who is on the call with us. And we have the presentation by both Miyakawa Sensei and Yamanoi Sensei will follow thereafter for 50 minutes. And then we have time for questions and answers. Now, there is no break, so we will be jumping right into here. And I'd like to introduce Nicholas Benish, the Representative Director of the Board Director Training Institute, who will be talking and going through comments and introduction. Thank you very much. Nick?
Thank you, Ben. My name is Nicholas Benish, as was just said. I'm the representative, or one of the representative directors of the Board Director Training Institute of Japan. I will be giving you a very short, as short as possible, quick run through introducing the Board Director Training Institute and what we do. So I'll be sharing screen now, and I'll do this as fast as possible so that we have maximum time for the professors and discussions and that sort of thing afterwards. We were set up in 2009 and certified by the Japanese government as a so-called public interest organization. This is a very special kind of nonprofit that only the government can certify, and we're only allowed to do certain things. One of them, of course, is, as the name suggests, director training and governance training, but another one is conducting research about corporate governance, which we were very excited about at the start and have worked years to collect data in order to do. We could also sell our data, which we do, to quantitative funds or asset managers and the like, or academic institutions. And we have to donate back half of the profits to the public interest goals, as you saw in the paragraph above. My fellow representative director is Professor Osagi, who is a well-known professor at Chuo University Law School, and is also on the corporate governance system committee of MEDI. So I'll just run through very quickly, basically what we updated our supporters and donors last year about our activities. As you can see, we were very busy, a number of courses. We have, over the last 10, 11 years, I guess going on 12 now, given training, director training to about 2,900 persons in Japan, mostly in 1 day or 2 day long programs. I also give a lot of speeches and that sort of thing, as you can see. By the way, I'll be sending these materials to you all later on, so you can look at them at your leisure, and that's what I'm going to run through very quickly now. We updated our donors and supporters also about our plans for this fiscal year, which included a director training for women initiative, again, a scholarship program which was very helpful last year in raising our female participation rate to 50%. We have already put together a role-playing course with 4 case studies, which is actually a lot of fun and very exciting, good debates, a very deep dive into being a director. And we have various data additions planned. Just to go over very briefly our basic courses, we have 2 basic courses, one in Japanese and one in English, for each a day long, including case studies and that sort of thing, mini cases as we call them. And then we also have an advanced course, the Shagai Torijuku, for people who've taken one of the basic courses or have sufficient background already. This has been quite popular over the last 2 years and is designed for the purposes and use of or the needs of outside directors in particular. And here, of course, is the role play course at the bottom. The next one will be on July 24th. So I would encourage you to sign up as fast as possible because I'll have limited seats at this point. But it's a fun course if you have the stamina and the interest in the topic. It's a really good open discussion to be had after role playing each of these 4 incidents and then going through what should have happened on those boards. Here's our e-learning on the left, and we are now developing, as you can see on the right, a finance training for directors and executive officers who are not familiar with finance. Unfortunately, there are too many of these people in Japan, particularly outside directors or lawyers, for instance, appointed to boards. And so we're just putting that course together now and hope to start offering it in September. This is a little bit about the Director Training for Women initiative this year. We've also already gone through phase 1 of that, and we're now about to start phase 2 as we enroll new sponsors. So if you are on this call and you're interested in sponsoring Director Training for Women, this is a very good way of expanding the talent pool for female director candidates or raising talent and skill levels for women in general as directors. I'd like to make a few personal comments on the webinar today, because in a way it's the fulfillment of a personal dream for me. When I proposed the Corporate Governance Code to the LVP quietly in 2013 and then in 2014 in a speech, a primary goal that I set forth was to the governance code to enable investors to compare companies by sort of opening up the black box of what's going on inside of boards via disclosure of their practices. And that's why we talked about, or I put in my memos, this concept of 2 wheels of a cart. It was the governance code was intended to help the stewardship code be more effective. And Japan presents a very interesting case study for analyzing the impact of governance. I think all of us recognize that, because companies have been adopting a new practices at varying rates. And that allows you to sort of look over time as to whether certain practices seem to have been helpful because they were adopted earlier and they had a result earlier than some other company, or not. And that's not often what happens in most countries. In most countries, the governance codes are much more sort of mandatory, and you don't get this disparity of many companies over time having different practices, which allows you for much deeper analysis. So, I've always wanted to conduct analysis, and now it's a perfect time because we finally have the data and 7 years of it since the governance code was put in place, so that we can do a time series analysis of the sort that the professors have done. And so for the first time, basically, by combining our structured detailed database, which goes back even further than 2015, with governance practices, but also deep corporate disclosure of all types from 3 different reports. By combining that with financial information, we can get a glimpse from the professor's analysis of what practices seem to work and what may be still lacking. And sorting this stuff out is really one of our, as a nonprofit, as you can see in the first page, one of our main missions. So it's very important to us. And I'd just like to make a note, lest you think otherwise. There were no pre-conclusions or preconditions set forth before we asked the professors to work with us on this analysis. Of course, they did all the heavy work. We helped out on the practical end and the data and that sort of thing, and some of the analysis, but they did most of the heavy lifting. And all of us were very interested in but just letting the data speak for itself. So what you're going to hear today may not be entirely super clear, but please think about it as a first step towards looking at high dimensional, many variables, corporate governance and financial data, and trying to work out what's really going on when governance works and when it doesn't work. But it's just the first step. So with that, I'm going to get out of share screen and hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
So before we end up switching to Miyakawa Sensei and Yamanoi Sensei, I'd just like to give them a quick introduction. Again, we are very glad for their participation today, and we've been very lucky to work with them over the past 6 months. They have been wonderful and extraordinarily determined researchers and have done a great job on all of this. So thank you very much, just from us, both myself and Nick.
Absolutely.
So Miyakawa Sensei, Daisuke Miyakawa, he's a professor with the School of Commerce at Waseda University. He's a visiting professor at the National Tax Agency, a visiting scholar with the Bank of Japan, and the chief economist at U-Tokyo Economic Consulting Incorporated. He has decades worth of experience in business economic topics and is a prolific researcher. He is joined today by Junichi Yamanoi Sensei, who is an associate professor at the School of Commerce at Waseda University, a concurrent researcher with the Research Institute of Business Administration, and an editorial board member with the Asia Pacific Journal of Management. He also has a business-focused background and had his PhD from the University of Connecticut in Business Administration. So with that having been said, Miyakawa Sensei, if I could ask that you would go ahead and start your presentation.
Okay, thank you for the kind introduction. Let me share my screen right here. Okay, then make it full screen like this. So Ben-san, can you see the laser pointer on the screen? Okay, all right.
Yes.
So I guess I have 15 minutes, including the summary provided by Yamanoi-san. So my name is Daisuke Miyakawa from Waseda University. So this is the joint work with Yamanoi-san, who's gonna talk a little bit about the implication of this study at the end of this presentation, and Ben-san and Nick-san from BDTI. So as you can see from the title, this paper intends to do some empirical analysis about the relationship between the corporate governance practice and the firm performance, which is measured by the stock return. Let me start from the motivation or background information. So we know that the corporate governance practice is important, and that has been studied intensively in the academic research over the last 15 years. So the basic idea is these corporate governance practices are expected to mitigate the agency problem through the good monitoring, exercise the good monitoring scheme, and providing the incentives for the related parties. But if it comes to the prediction power of these practices in terms of the corporate performance, results are kind of mixed, specifically from this meta-analysis, series of the meta-analysis, in which the people are using the empirical result coming from the multiple academic studies and try to see the pattern of the results. That is called as meta-analysis. And based on these recent meta-analysis, the results are quite mixed, meaning in some researches, the variables, corporate governance variables, working as the good predictor for the future performance, but in some cases not. So in this sense, the results are kind of mixed. So given these discussions, the starting point of this project is the conjecture that there might be too many variables, too many corporate governance variables we can use. So it might sound kind of be puzzling, because in general sense, if we have too many informations, that's good for us. But sometimes it's not, because suppose there are so many corporate governance variables in our hands, but usually the number of companies are limited and the number of periods we can use for analysis are limited. So we may not be able to use entire set of variables in an effective way. So that is the meaning why we are saying there might be too many variables in our hands. So as you're gonna see in a minute, even if you focus on the single items associated with each corporate governance practices, there are so many informations. But at the same time, if you take a look at the interaction among them, meaning what's going to happen if we have this corporate governance practice A in one hand and the corporate governance B in the other hand, what's going to happen? This is the meaning of this interaction term. If we take into account the possibility of incorporating these interaction terms to the model, the numbers are actually huge. So that means we have to conduct some additional analysis based on this environment. That is the reason why we try to do some variable selection through the kind of very simple machine learning technique. So as I said, the starting point is the notion that there might be too many variables. And given those variables, we're gonna do some variable selection and construct some prediction model to connect the selected corporate governance variable with the future company performance. That is the goal of this project. So we're gonna do three things. First one is as I said, using the kind of machine learning technique, kind of classical machine learning technique called lasso. That is also called as the sparse modeling, to select the corporate governance variables which are strongly correlated with future total shareholder returns. So that is the performance measure we are using in this project. So here you can see the meaning of the variable selection. So that we're going to focus on some selected variables provided by this analysis, and use that list of the selected variables to model the prediction work. That is the first step. And one small kind of problem of this technique is the estimated coefficients kind of biased because of some technical issue. So that we need to confirm the result of this section A with very standard regression technique, OLS, so that we can bring the result of the lasso to the formal prediction model. So that this might sound kind of small thing, but this is very important step toward the construction of the prediction model. That is the second part. And given those results, we can model the prediction model. And based on that result coming from that prediction model, we can set up the very simple investment strategy and try to think about the contribution coming from the corporate governance variables to the investment performance. So if we succeed in these three items, we have the set of like variables, corporate governance related variables, which are strongly correlated with the future performance. Then based on that variables, we can construct the prediction model, which leads to the nice investment strategy. That is the direction of my talk. All right, so you may not be strongly interested in this empirical framework, but let me pick up some important items. So here is the entire setup of the model. So if you are familiar with this kind of data analysis, this part might look familiar. This is the simple OLS part. So that means we're gonna estimate some coefficient which is associated with each variable, so that is fitting to the outcome variable. And in this last framework, by adding some additional factors, we can start from so many variables and reduce the dimension of the variable so that we can pick up the most important variables in our hands. Here, the most important meaning the high correlation with the future performance. So we have to set up the outcome variables here and a bunch of explanatory variables here. In this project, we are setting up the total shareholder return over the multiple windows as the outcome. Then using the huge number of corporate governance related variables plus the financial indicator in the explanatory variables. Then from this analysis, we can pick up the set of the important variables from those lists. Okay, that is the first part. And the second part is just revisiting this result through the standard OLS regression framework so that we can confirm the result coming from this lasso is consistent with the standard estimation technique. Then after that, we have the list of corporate governance related variables in our hand, which are correlated with the future TSR. Then now we are in the stage of developing the prediction model. So the important point of this stage, we try to avoid cheating. So that we have to be careful about information leakage from the data training part and the testing part. In this sense, we are splitting the data in two dimensions. First one is the firm ID, and the second one is time horizon. So that in short, we're gonna use the set of firms' data up to some point to train the model. And after that, we have some prediction model. Then based on that model and this data, meaning like untouched set of firms and the slightly like a recent period of time data, we're gonna test the performance of this model. That's what we're gonna do. And to be more precise, here is the image of the investment exercise. So that after having the list of variables provided by the lasso, we have prediction model. Then applying that model to the test data, we're gonna estimate the total shareholder return for each individual stock. That is plotted in the horizontal axis. So in this sense, this blue region accounts for the stock which are predicted to have the positive return over the next few years. Then the vertical axis accounts for the actual realized return of each individual stock. So in this sense, above this line, stocks have the actual positive return. Okay, so what we're gonna show today is the very simple long and short strategy. So that basically we're gonna long this blue zone and short this red zone. So if we have the large number of observations in this upper right space and the lower left space, our return is gonna be higher. So that is the mechanics of this investment strategy. So that as usual, it is not easy to beat the market. So there are some mistakes in this exercise. I mean, actually, there are lots of dots in the lower right panel and upper left panel. So that this gonna leads to the loss in the strategy. But as far as the number of the items are larger in this upper right and the lower left, we're gonna get a high return. That is the mechanics of this investment exercise. Okay, so let me briefly talk about the data and the important part, number of variables. Then I'm gonna show you the result associated with the 3 steps just I explained. Okay, so as I said, we're gonna focus on the total shareholder return of the Japanese enterprise stock over the period from 2015 to 2022. So due to the kind of limited availability of the corporate governance variables, so we cannot use the entire listed firms, but in this exercise, we can only use around 2,000 firms with all the CZ variables available in our data set. Okay. Then about the total shareholder return, this is a kind of standard. So we're gonna take the ratio of the market cap between 2 points, and we add dividends over those between those 2 points, so that we can make the total shareholder return, and we can annualize that so that we can compare the outcomes associated with the different windows. So in this exercise, actually in the full paper, we are showing all the result accounting for the short-term, mid-term, and long-term TSR. But in this presentation, I'm gonna mainly focus on this short and medium term. And at least at this point, we are only adjusting this TSR by subtracting the industry and year average TSR. Of course, there are many other ways to adjust, standardize this return. For example, we may want to use the factor model to take up the alpha. But at this moment, what we are doing is very simple. We just subtract the industry and year average TSR from this individual stock level return. That is a way to construct a dependent variable. Okay, so regarding the independent variables, as I said, there are so many variables. So starting from the financial indicators, we are setting up the standard set of financial indicators that is 64 variables. Regarding the corporate governance variables, which are coming from the BDTI's go-to-data database, so at least at this moment, we are using the 69 corporate governance related variables. So if you sum up those two numbers, it's more than 100, and it's so many. But if we take into account the interaction among the corporate governance variables, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the number is gonna be further increased. So starting from some items, 69 items, and multiply the other items, you're gonna get 4,600 additional variables. So then we're gonna start from this 64 plus 69 plus 4,600 variables, then apply the lasso to reduce the dimension of the variables so that we can make the prediction model. All right, so let me start to talk about the result. So sorry about these small characters here, but in this slide 8, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the estimation results coming from this lasso technique. So as I said, original number of the variables are huge. It's like 4,000 something, slightly less than 5,000. And after applying the lasso estimation, we're gonna reduce the number of variables. And these numbers are selected in the way that they are strongly correlated with future performance. So here I picked up only the single term of the corporate governance variables. So each row accounts for denotes some specific corporate governance variables. Okay, and we categorize those selected corporate governance variables into the 3 categories, starting from the internal monitoring related variables and external monitoring related variables and the incentive here. Okay. And as I said, for the TSR, we set up the 3 windows, starting from the short term, 1-year window, and a medium term window, and long term window. Okay, that's the reason why we have 3 columns here. And here, the blue and red accounts for the correlation between each corporate governance item and the return. So if this is blue, the correlation is positive, and red is negative. So as you can see, the selected variable, list of the selected variables depend on the length of the window. If you take a look at the only 1-year window, short-term window, there are not so many variables are selected, meaning like even if you take a look at the corporate governance variables, it is not so useful to predict the short-term return. But if it goes to the 3-year window, there are relatively more variables are selected through the process of lasso. So that means once you have the information about corporate governance variables, it might be useful to predict the medium-term return. Okay. So since the character is so small, let me move on to the next slide and pick up some important implication coming from these estimation results. Okay, as I said, we categorize the corporate governance variables into 3 parts: external monitoring related one, and internal monitoring related one, and incentive one. And then we start from the huge number of variables, and from the list, the lasso process picked up the relatively more variables categorized in external monitoring. For example, this CZ28, which is accounting for the disclosure status of compensation. I'm going to talk about this definition of this variable later in the next slides. But what I'm trying to say is, if this variable is positively correlated with the future TSR, or if the company is publicly announcing this disclosure policy, that is measured as one variable called the CZ34. This is again positively correlated with future TSR. And the frequency of the corporate governance reports are also having the positive correlation with the future TSR, or the existence of the controlling shareholder, or the shareholder concentration itself has the high kind of positive correlation with the future TSR. So as such, after the reduction of the variable dimension, we kind of find that there are some signals we can get from this external monitoring related to corporate governance variables. Of course, there are some variables negatively correlated with future TSR. For example, the shareholding, or the shares held by the friendly firms. Those status are negatively correlated with future performance. So it is not a good sign for the future performance. At the same time, the CEO approval under the 90%, so it's like a less popular CEO is a bad sign for the future TSR. So that is the second group of the variables. So anyway, there are relatively many variables related to the external monitoring are selected by Lasso. That is the first implication. And somewhat surprising for us, if you take a look at the internal monitoring variable, there are not so many compared to the external monitoring. For example, ratio of the specialists among the board member or the number of auditors, those numbers are negatively correlated with the future TSR. So that those are kind of interesting, but a number of the variables are not so many. Of course, the employee stock option has seemed to have the positive correlation with the future TSR, but among the many variables associated with this incentive type corporate governance variables, only one variables are picked up. So as we are intensively discussing in the full paper, so that at least from our data, so the external monitoring has the good candidate for us to pick up the signal associated with the future TSR. So let me talk a little bit about interaction term. So as I said, the meaning of interaction term is the interaction between the two corporate governance variables. So here, I'm going to provide the two examples in the page 10 and the page 11. So let me start from the first example. So here, I'm focusing on the CZ68. That is the status existence of the CEO approved under the 90%. So the kind of less popular existence of the less popular CEO. That is the meaning of the CZ68. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, this has a bad signal for the future TSR. And that is the one result we got from the previous slides. So here, the question is there any case and which this impact coming from the CZ68 can be intensified or not? That is a question. And from the last estimation, the last tells us there are some important interaction terms which is associated with the future TSR, and there are some examples. So the way to read this variable is the following. So this negative impact coming from the CZ68 can be stronger, meaning like become worse under some specific circumstances. For example, if the female director ratio is lower, this impact coming from CZ68 becomes larger, meaning like worse. And the second CZ28, this accounts for the disclosure of individual directors' compensation. So the definition of this variable is that the company reports there is some individual directors having the high salary. So in some sense, this variable accounts for the company's status of whether they are paying the high salary to the individual director or not. And the way to interpret this item is if this number is 0, the negative association between the TSR and this CZ68 becomes larger. Okay, so that's a way to read this CZ20 number. And as a third example, again, this less popular CEOs, but the signal for the future TSR is going to be intensified when the public announcement of disclosure policy is not available. So in some sense, the specific external monitoring practice can be weaker when internal monitoring practice and or as external monitoring practice are weaker. So in this sense, the corporate governance practice is not working thoroughly as a single term, but it can be the case that there are some interaction among those items. That is one illustration coming from the last estimation. So let me move on to the second example. So that is about the role of the independent directors. So again, somewhat surprisingly, the CZ3 variable that accounts for the independent director ratio is not chosen by Lasso. So that means on average, the CZ3 does not have a significant correlation with TSR. So again, this is kind of surprising because people are saying independent director is important, but how come this is not related with the future TSR? The one interesting result spit out from the last estimation is if you interact the CZ3 with the CZ4, which accounts for the size of the board member, now we have the strong positive correlation with the TSR in over the multiple windows. That means existence, the individual independent director ratio itself is not so meaningful, but it can be meaningful under specific circumstance. For example, the board size is larger. So that is an implication coming from here. So again, this kind of exercise tells us that the specific internal monitoring practice can be stronger or it can be significant when the internal monitoring practice is stronger. So in our field, we call those kind of relationship as a complementarity. So some like corporate governance variables are working together in a nice way. Okay. All right. So here's some note. So there is a variety of way to interpret this result, but one way to interpret this result is it might be the case that unmeasured quality of independent directors may be an explanation for this kind of phenomena. So we don't know. We are just mechanically running the Lasso regression and take up the sort of the significant correlation between some items with the TSR. So the interpretation is going to be the next step, but we think it tells something, some important thing to us. Okay, so I have explained the result coming from Lasso so far, and basically we have now the list of the selected variables in our hand, which can be used to construct the prediction model. Okay, but before moving to the development of the prediction model, we have to be sure about the quantitative relationship between the TSR and each individual variables. And due to the time constraint, I need to skip the detail, but in general, the coefficient spit out from the Lasso is kind of biased. So we cannot bring this directly to the construction of the prediction model. So that we're gonna deduce the correct estimation based on the list of the selected variables. That is the right panel of this slide. And what we would like to emphasize here is after running the standard regression, the qualitative feature provided by the Lasso are completely kept, meaning like if this CZ9 item is negatively correlated with the future TSR, even if we use the like appropriate way to estimate the model, this negative correlation is has been kept. But the point is the coefficient, size of the coefficient itself can be different from the result coming from Lasso. And when we try to construct a prediction model, we have to use this correctly estimated coefficient. That is a point we would like to emphasize here. Okay. And this is a kind of, again, looks like a small thing, but actually it's important. That is if you run the Lasso type regression, the result is sometimes like it's very unstable. So that in one trial, you can get a set of variables chosen by the Lasso, but if you try again, the list is going to be different. So that is a sort of the usual problem associated with the Lasso estimation. But if we carefully take a look at the data and do some simulation exercise, we can confirm that the result we have got so far are kind of stable over those kind of multiple trials. So that we assure that we can use those list of the chosen variables to set up the prediction model. Okay, so now we have the correct estimates of coefficients associated with the selected corporate governance variables provided by the Lasso. So now we are in a good position to construct a model and test the investment strategy implied by the prediction model. And here is I'm going to skip the model training part because that is just exactly same as I explained in a few slides ago. So then I jump into the result part. So then now we need to avoid the cheating. So I set up the training data and estimate the model so that now I have a model. And bring this model to the untouched data. I'm gonna exercise the investment exercise. And here is the result. The way to read this table, read this figure is the following. This solid line accounts for the distribution of the investment performance coming from model A. And this dashed line is a distribution of the investment performance coming from the model A plus corporate governance variables. So in that sense, the difference between the solid line and the dashed line accounts for the sort of the marginal contribution coming from the selected corporate governance variables. Why we have a distribution? Because we are doing the investment exercise multiple times by doing the random sampling from the test data so that we can see the distribution of the return. We are doing this because if we show you the 1 point result coming from the one test data, so you might be suspect the cheating. So in order to avoid those kind of suspicion, we show the sort of the result of the full exercise, actually 1,000 times exercise coming from the random sampling. So here, the model A is kind of poor model. That is the kind of very poor model having the constant term only. So in that sense, this is kind of sort of the stupid model. But starting from the stupid model, if you add the selected corporate governance variables to the model, the returns are significantly improved. That is a nice information. And instead of using the stupid model, what about starting from the little bit more sophisticated model, having the financial indicator as the explanatory variables? Difference between the solid line and the dashed line becomes smaller, but still, if you take a look at the medium-term return prediction, like a medium-term return, realized return. So here, there are some difference between the solid line and the dashed line. Somewhat interestingly, in the recent period, those like two difference seems to be smaller, but we are not sure if this is only with luck or like a systematical evolution of the difference between those two distributions. But at least at some point, we can see the kind of difference between those two items, which kind of show the marginal contribution coming from the corporate governance variables. Okay, so we have 20 more minutes. So let me talk a little bit about the next task, and I'm gonna hand over to the Yamanori-san to summarize the implication coming from our study. So as I have explained, so in this project, we establish the correlation between CZ variables and future TSR. But it's not simply CZ variables in general, but selected CZ variables through the process of loss regression. Okay, and this kind of like a sparse modeling technique is necessary to handle the high dimension of the corporate governance variables. The dimension is high because not only because the single term number of the single terms are large, but at the same time, if you take a look at the multiple interaction terms, the number is going to be huge. So that we have to use this kind of sparse modeling technique. And it seems that we got some result, at least up to some extent useful for practical purpose. That's what we got from this project. So remember, in this exercise, we are setting up the very simple, sort of the very preliminary investment strategy. This is just a long and short strategy without taking care any kind of like, for example, weight or like some specific treatment with specific stock. We just take a look at the predicted result and do the long and short investment strategy. Then still we can get some positive return and kind of confirm that there are some marginal contribution coming from the corporate governance variables. So that's the reason why we said these results might be useful for the practical purpose. Of course, as usual, there are several items we left as our homework. So for example, as I mentioned in the presentation, so right now we are doing very simple kind of benchmarking for the outcome variables. We are just subtracting the industry and year average from the individual stock return. But for example, I mean, obviously, we may want to use the multi-factor model and compute the alpha from those models. And instead of taking a look at the kind of industry adjusted return, we may want to take a look at this alpha. That is the first thing. And as I briefly mentioned in the previous slides, it seems like some evolution of the contribution coming from the corporate governance items over time. So that it may be useful to take a look at those evolution, specifically given that the corporate governance practice are developing in Japan, so that there should be some time varying phenomena in this field. That is the second item. And the third one is the role of the corporate governance variables might be different over the multiple markets, like starting from the prime and going to the more like a growth market. So it may be interesting to take a look at the difference of the way of corporate governance working in terms of the predictors. And the last one is, as I repeatedly saying, the investment strategy we constructed is very preliminary. So usually the people are very smart, so that they can come up with the variety of investment strategies starting from this kind of information. Okay, that's it. So the Yamanoi-san, would you like to talk a little bit about the implication? I'm gonna move
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for your presentation, Miyakawa-san. So yes, let me show you some implications, especially for practitioners. So we started a research question that so we have so many corporate governance variables in hand. So what about corporate governance variables really matter to TSR firm performance? So we found that yes, external monitoring mechanisms matter. Yes, of course, more external monitoring mechanisms matter than do internal monitoring mechanisms. So if you practitioners, if you want to improve your corporate governance of your company, it may be better or beneficial to focus on external improvement in external monitoring mechanisms rather than internal monitoring mechanisms first. So that's first implication. The second thing is we found that some combinations of corporate governance variables, they enhance TSR. So that means some corporate governance mechanisms, they are actually complementary with each other, not substitutes. So, for example, we found that yes, outside directors, independent directors ratio itself did not matter. However, it became effective when the board size of the firm is larger. So maybe board size represents the knowledge pool of the board. If the firm has more knowledge pool of the board, and which is that is when the board is such kind of a board with abundant knowledge is monitored by independent directors, yes, the board will work more effectively. So again, independent director itself doesn't matter, but it gets effective when it is complemented with both sides, right? So if you include certain corporate governance mechanism practices, so you should consider including another one, which is complementary simultaneously. Then you will get more effective corporate governance mechanisms in your company. So also, yes, as we see bad CEOs, when they are appointed again, yes, TSR gets worse when internal and external monitoring mechanisms did not work. So yes, we see some kind of interactions between that. So please consider such kind of interactions when you include when you adopt corporate governance mechanisms. So the caveat here, first one is, so you may consider, okay, so corporate governance mechanisms, practices, which are not selected by Russell. Are they, well, they are not effective. So should we ignore them? No, we do not say so. We do not say so. Because our results, they are based on our estimation model, Russell, also our sample, Japanese listed firms from 2015 to 2022. So if you choose another context, maybe US, Europe, or another time period, maybe in the future, okay, so you may see different results. Okay, you can use our result as a reference, but we do not say this is the fact of only the fact. This is only the fact of corporate governance mechanism and firm performance. Okay, so could you go to the next slide? No, next page. Okay, so next caveat is, yeah, okay, so should we invest in firms with corporate governance practices selected by Russell? Yes, we can say yes, but again, we show just correlation between corporate governance practices and TSR, not causation. We have not tested causal relationships between corporate governance practices and TSR. We showed limited insight in that. So we do not know actually. We do not know what's going on actually behind that. So we actually how to say we do not know how actually a certain corporate governance mechanism enhanced TSR. So yes, for example, that's possible. For example, maybe for example, as corporate governance practice and firm performance, yes, it is positively correlated. Yeah, fine. But there may be another factor which is not included in our analysis. In that case, the factor might enhance corporate governance practice and also TSR simultaneously. In that case, we see the positive correlation between corporate governance practice and TSR, even if they did not actually related in causality. So yes, please be careful. Our finding is just correlation, not causation. Okay, so the last one is, yes, our next step. So as Miyakawa-san said, yes, we included so many corporate governance practices in our analysis. Yes, and we found some significant ones. That's great. But we did not include all of corporate governance practices and characteristics. So some important factors are still missing in our analysis. For example, yes, the quality of independent directors. Yes, yes, that's a field of BDTI's training. So yes, independent directors, yes, they have different, yes, background, yes, demographic background, for example, female, foreigners, and maybe and also specialists like academician like us. So such kind of background itself has a lot of information, but their capability as independent directors, they are not included in our analysis. So they also matter definitely to TSR because such kind of good qualified independent directors will provide more useful advice to the board and give more effective monitoring. That's possible. So in the future research, future studies, we can work on more sophisticated analysis with detailed data. So that's it. That's all from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you both. We very much appreciate your time and your work on this particular project. It's been wonderful to work with both of you. And there's been a lot to talk about. And I've already actually gotten a number of questions from individuals. So I'm going to jump right into those and basically ask one individual wanted to ask, and some folks, Miyakawa-sensei, may not be familiar with the lasso regression. And the question was if it captures nonlinear relationships. So a lasso regression, just as a reminder to everyone, is a way that we can take a large number of variables and just have all of them go into the model and pick out certain ones that are more important, and then drop the variables that don't seem to be of importance. And the question, Miyakawa-sensei, is this a model that allows for nonlinear relationships? So, for example, if outside directors and the ratio was one variable, and a company had 10% outside directors or 30% outside directors, and many companies had that, but it turns out in another modeling exercise that it only actually matters if you have a majority of outside directors, so 50% or more, that being a nonlinear relationship, a difference in a small amount of percent, but a big jump in performance. Is that considered under the Lasso model, or does Lasso not do that?
So thank you for the nice, important question. That is somewhat related to what Yamanoi-san pointed out. So right now, what we are dealing with the linear model, having the very simple treatment of each explanatory variables. But we can use the variety of nonlinear terms in this setup, because even if you set up the, let's say, square term of the number of the individual director, that can be used as one independent explanatory variables. So in that sense, we can use the nonlinearity in this model. And actually, the interaction term between the two corporate governance variables is a one typical example of the nonlinear correlation. Okay, so we can do that, but simply because we are using the sort of the simple treatment of the each variable, so that we are not taking a look at the example what the Benson mentioned, like some discontinuity of the impact coming from the some ratio. But in practice we can, but we haven't done yet. That's my question. That's my answer. So yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. And then another question that came in was basically if there was, once you've reviewed your results, there is sort of the comment that was made that some of the percentages that came out of Lasso or the statistical regressions seemed a little small if somebody was to invest on that basis alone. And they were curious if, or I should rephrase the question, are investors still leaving money on the table if they're not considering corporate governance variables?
So let me make sure if I understand the question correctly. So are you talking about the size of the coefficient here? Or
yes, the size of the coefficient.
Okay, I see. Yeah, so maybe it might be better to take a look at this table. Mm-hmm. So here, the number looks smaller, but as usual, this size of the coefficients are determined by how to measure the outcome and how to measure the explanatory variables, right? So if you have the different unit for the y and x, then the size of the coefficient itself can be different, okay? So in that sense, in this context, size itself is not so important because we are measuring the TSR as the annualized return, and in the not a percentage expression, but it's a decimal expression. So for example, if you take a look at the coefficient associated with CZ9, this says 0.004. That means 0.4%. 0.4% in this context is not so small for me. So in this sense, still the coefficient has some sizable implication. And at the same time, moving from the Lasso and moving to this OLS estimation, you can specifically see the statistical significance of these estimates. And most of them are associated with this nice star. That means those are actually statistically away from zero. So meaning like even if they look small number, but it's statistically away from zero, meaning like there are some there could be some signals coming from these variables. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The next question is actually directed towards Nick. So Nick, one of our participants asked how you might define a bad CEO. This was in relation in part to one of the variables that was highlighted by Miyakawa-sensei and Yamanoi-sensei on individuals who have under 90% support.
A bad CEO. Well, the market is defining that he's a bad CEO because they're not voting for him. And what effectively the market is saying when they see a support ratio of 88% or 85% or something like that, often in the Japanese market is that there's not rapid accountability in the sense that the person is not terminated soon. And next year he's put up for re-election again. And, for instance, as may happen in the case of Mr. Mitarai at Canon, his support ratio has to get down even lower, to 75% or something, before they finally get rid of him. So I think that's one of the major reasons why this lower than 90% criteria ends up being a negative criteria, is that the market is assuming that nothing's going to change internally, and he won't be replaced for maybe 2 more years or so, even if bad performance continues. I wonder if I'm not sure that answers the question fully, because it all depends on the investor as to how you define a bad CEO. But certainly, in general, poor performance and poor TSR as part of that would define it for most investors.
Thank you very much. So this next question, if I can direct to Yamanoi-sensei, as I know that you did a large part of the work on the review of literature in the paper, but one of the questions came up as to why is this a new thing in terms of why is this research important now, and haven't other people already looked at corporate governance variables in the past? Is this a new research opportunity for other institutions, think tanks, something that might be previously have been ignored?
Okay, so yes, as you said, these corporate governance variables in our models, they have been discussed already in previous studies, but each study uses part of corporate governance practices in each paper. So I say not all, none of papers, previous studies have used all the variables simultaneously. As I said, there are some corporate governance variables, they are correlated with each other. So we may not see the independent, individual corporate governance effect if we do not include everything in the same analysis. So our study is sort of new in that case, from that viewpoint.
Yeah. Very much appreciated. And then I think that this question can go to either Miyakawa-sensei or Yamanoi-sensei, but have there been any reactions from other researchers as to this paper? It's a working paper now. I know Nick knows you had both presented this at the Japan Economics Association spring meeting this year, and I'm curious if there was any actual response from other professors.
So maybe Yamanoi-san may want to say something, but let me start from the sort of the reaction coming from the audience and the discussant, assigned discussant for a paper. So the one important comment for me is actually the contribution or like a purpose of the research is not a single. So it's actually at least twofold. The first one is what Yamanoi-san mentioned as the importance of the complementarity. The people in this discipline have been looking at the role of each individual corporate governance practice, and they take a look at to what extent those are important in terms of, for example, the contribution to the future firm performance. But what we found from our analysis is it might not be enough, and we may need to take a look at the multiple items at the same time. So in that sense, this contributes to the discussion of how to design, how to evaluate the good corporate governance practice So that is the first direction or first potential contribution of this kind of project. And the second one is the more like investment part. So again, as clearly mentioned by Yamanoi-san, the assembling the huge like a number of the corporate governance variables and somehow use effectively those information to construct a prediction model has not been largely done yet. But thanks to the database provided by BDTA, those contain the huge number of the corporate governance variables, which includes some original information. At the same time, the RAST itself is not so fancy technique, but recent advancement of the machine learning technique allow us to set up the nice prediction model. So that's gonna contribute to the development of the investment practice. But that is another direction. So in some sense, this is one paper, but it has the contribution at least in the two folds. That is the one important comment coming from the discussant. Yamane-san, do you want to add anything?
Not special, but we will present this work next week to researchers at the RIETI, the Research Institute of METI. So I hope we will receive some comments from them.
Yeah, I think so.
Very good. Ben, I wonder if I could make a comment that maybe
Sure.
First I should maybe more simplistically answer the question that came back a minute ago. Basically, when the support vote for the CEO dips below 90% to 85%, this is a very bad sign. The company's done something in terms of performance that a lot of shareholders are not happy with, or they've had a scandal or something. Something's gone wrong here, or they have too many Allegiant holdings or something like that. And the very fact that they put him up, the same CEO, up for re-election is basically a statement that they're going to continue the same practices or whatever it was before, the strategy, the Allegiant holdings, whatever it was that they're dissatisfied with, again. And so that is what's causing, that's the definition of a bad CEO, someone who puts himself basically he controls the nominations committee often, who puts himself up for election again, notwithstanding the fact that many shareholders are not happy. And this relates to what was a primary finding of the study by the two professors, which was basically that external monitoring mechanisms are extremely important. And I think if you've ever sat on a board, you're not surprised by this conclusion at all, because as an outside director, that the other outside directors and the internal directors, we have better governance and better discussion when this is a board full of people who are cognizant and following what the outside market is thinking about them, what analysts are writing about them, what large investors are engaging to them on, and are assiduous in making disclosure. They have a disclosure policy, this kind of thing. When we have our eyes turned toward the market, we tend to have better internal practices and have higher level of quality of corporate governance in general. And in fact, that I actually use that as an outside director. I would refer to the fact that it seems like shareholders seem to think X, Y, Z, or if I was a shareholder, then gee, I'd be worried about this. And that has more of an impact on board members. So this is not surprising at all. Another aspect that's very interesting about our analysis is that rather simple, firm characteristic features. And Ben and I have been looking at this for a while, so we kind of knew this already. But factors like the age of the company, the younger the company, it tends to outperform, or the having a higher level of concentration of shareholders, which is basically the so-called large shareholder phenomenon. When you have large holders who have a large stake, or several large holders with a stake, or maybe it's a family held company to some extent, this tends to correlate with outperformance. And we capture that with a very simple Herfindahl index, which takes the top 10 and basically computes, puts each percentage to the power of 2 and adds them all up and comes up with an index showing concentration of shareholders. And that is an important factor across the board. Also, Allegiant holdings, we all knew that was important, but it's proved here And on the last one, which we called external monitoring, which actually kind of internal, is the factor which is a little bit hard to explain, but what I think was on page 8 of the materials. Maybe you can show it that us to that, Ben, or I can. But anyway, it's the factor where Professor Miyakawa was talking about go back a page. Yeah, the disclosure comes at that page right there in the middle.
Sorry, which page?
Oh, this is fine. This is fine.
Okay.
If you look at on this page here, we have disclosure of director compensation. What this is basically whether or not the company has paid or is paying more than 100 million yen to any director or not. So said in reverse, if you have to disclose that you are paying any director more than 100 million, it means you are. you have a more robust, meaty, higher number compensation policy for executives than companies that are not forced into the rule of having to disclose whether they pay 100 million to anyone, because they don't. And so this is really a proxy for whether you have a robust compensation policy, usually based on performance incentives. So we call that an external monitoring feature, but it's really kind of internal. It's external in the sense of disclosing it, but it's internal in the sense that the company's board itself is deciding it. So I thought I would just bring that up because it's hard to understand otherwise.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Nick. Miyakawa-sensei and Yamanoi-sensei, actually, Miyakawa-sensei, you may want to reshare just for those last couple of slides with the models with the solid line and the dotted lines, because we had a good question from the chat, which was asking about the difference between the earlier model, so the one that's the constant and then the constant in CG, and this one with the constant financial versus the constant financial and CG metrics, and how this one appears that it might be weaker in terms of results. And could you elaborate or talk a little bit about what's going on here and why that might be the case?
So are you talking about the difference between this page 14 and page
That's
15,
correct.
right? Okay. So again, somewhat overlapped with what Yamanoi-san mentioned. What we are doing now is the construction of the prediction model. So the idea is there are some certain set of variables, then take out the signal from those variables and use that to predict future. That is a basic idea. And the thing is, if you start from like a poor setup, just like a model only with constant, the way to take out the signal is very limited. So once you throw in the selected corporate governance practice variables, it's going to contribute a lot. That is the reason why we have the kind of visible, sizable difference between the slit and the dashed lines in these slides. But if you start from the more like a sophisticated model, like starting with the financial variables, remember, even for the financial variables, we applied lasso technique. So starting from the 60 or 70 variables, we picked up some important financial indicators correlated with the future TSR. So in that sense, the starting point is not now stupid. So now we have the starting from the sophisticated model. And simply because those sophisticated model has the associated, attached with some signals coming from the financial indicators, marginal contribution coming from the corporate governance variables are relatively limited. But what we would like to emphasize here is that still, if you take a look at the result associated with the medium-term TSR, we have some visible difference between the solid and the dashed line. And if you run the sort of the simple test for the difference between those two distributions, in some cases, we can actually reject that the difference is zero. So meaning like there is some difference. So in that sense, the result difference between the slide 14 and 15 are natural because we start from the sophisticated model, but still we have some contribution coming from the corporate governance variables. That is the main message from these two slides.
So I guess putting in different words, in Ben's language, basically what this is showing is that investors are leaving money on the table if they ignore corporate governance variables.
I think so, yes. And the one more important thing is, as I repeatedly saying in my presentation, that our investment strategy based on the prediction result is kind of very, the preliminary, like very simple. We just buy the same amount of stock when we observe the positive return from our prediction model and the shorting the negative prediction. And we are not doing any weighting. We are not doing any other stuff, taking a look at, for example, the result of the predicted return. So you're gonna do means investors can do more, apparently. So that is another reason why we can get a kind of small difference. But still, Nick-san is right. That there are some room for us to take advantage of the signals embedded to the corporate governance variables. That's the main message.
So for instance, some of the things, and Sensei, please tell me if I'm wrong, but some of the things we have not done here is, we haven't selected out or tried to find those industries where, for whatever reason, they're just so backward that the practices aren't working at all, or we haven't attempted to add hurdles for to cut out the situations where it seems like the model doesn't seem to work so well. We've simply applied it to all firms, right? And even then, you find an outperformance is almost a surprising result, is kind of the way I viewed it.
That's true. So if you take a look at the usual academic papers in the field of investment, people are doing sorting the stock and making the portfolio. And usually they're gonna long the extreme one and shorting the other extreme one. So that means you're gonna ignore the middle one. But here, we intentionally use everything. Because this should be the starting point of the discussion. So even if we stick to this kind of sort of stupid, like a preliminary investment strategist, you can get some, meaning you're gonna do more. That's a main message from this exercise.
Right. So if you had a smarter investment strategy that didn't short everything and long everything, depending on which side of the model it came out of, if you said, say, I want at least a 2% predicted return, you would probably end up with a better return overall.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think what Yamanoi-sensei said about the fact that when you have a larger board, you may have a larger pool of talent is a very interesting point, and sort of one of the key interesting results that came out of your study that deserves sort of more study. I believe you found out, and it's in the paper, that even though independent directors as companies define them, doesn't show correlation. And that's not surprising to me, because the Corporate Governance Code allows each company to come up with its own criteria for independence based on the TSC's criteria. And as a result, almost every company has criteria for independence that are more lax than the TSC's more stringent criteria. So they're not that independent often, and it's not a very credible data point. And what we focused on at BDTI is looking at the actual TSC criteria and putting into the database those directors who fit actually all of the independence criteria in the TSC and have no, you might say, tick marks that, relationships with suppliers, or, they were a customer of the company, that kind of thing. And so they actually are 100% independent per the TSC's own more stringent criteria. And I believe when you looked at that, that the ratio of the more stricter independent defined TSC definition directors was positively correlated with future TSR as the board size became larger, which I thought was quite interesting, because it's basically saying, you've got, first of all, possibly more independent directors, but maybe not. But anyway, you have a larger proportion of them being TSC defined, i.e. more truly independent directors. And that combined with board size did correlate with TSR outperformance. So what this is all kind of seemed to me, it's coming back to what I sort of know or think I know in practice, which is to say, well, it's not the number of outside directors that matters, it's the quality. In fact, it's not the number. And that's true with independent, with inside directors as well. The quality of the board is what matters the most. And particularly when you get to independent directors, if you're looking for their monitoring to be effective, they have to be high quality. And it's so hard to define quality, as Yamanoi Sensei was saying. That really is the next issue. Unfortunately, we cannot do that or even try to do that because the TSC's format for the disclosure items in corporate governance reports doesn't allow us to pick out whether they do any director training or not. That's simply lumped into one big XBRL tag with 11 other items, and we can't select out the data point as to how much director training you did or not. So we'd like to look at the quality of directors in general, but unfortunately, the way the TSC has presented the format, they've closed that door and made it impossible to get the data.
Thank you for the comment, Nick. Actually, that's a really good segue to another question that had been asked. And so Miyakawa Sensei and Yamanoi Sensei, being closer to the data in a way, having done the results research versus us, was there anything other than independent directors not showing up as a variable that came out of LASSO as surprising? Was there any surprising takeaways to you as you were going through the research, or anything that stood out to you as interesting?
So let me again emphasize the sort of the interaction among the sort of the external monitoring and the internal monitoring actually. So that is what I myself was not sort of the expecting a lot, because of course there are theoretically variety of chances for the variables to interact, but those kind of interaction terms, for example, that the CZ68 that accounts for the CEO approval under 90%, and the female director ratio, which sort of the accounts for some characteristic of the board itself. So those kind of interaction is theoretically predicted, but it's kind of interesting to see that it actually is working in the data. So again, those kind of interaction is the one thing. So I found interesting. That is the one thing. And the other thing is, I mean, it might not be a surprising result, but that Harbinger index, the robustness of the Harbinger index, and the other sort of variables related to the shareholding pattern, like a cross shareholding, the share held by the family, friendly shareholders, those kind of stuff are very robust over the variety of model configurations and the data and the period. So in some sense, like a traditional insights are very valid for sure. And plus, by taking a look at the interaction terms, those kind of sort of advanced stuff, we can sort of explain how these variables are working in a more precise way and comprehensive way. That is the kind of one interesting experience for me, like academic research. Yeah, thank you.
Yamanoi Sensei?
Okay, yeah, for me, it's surprising that we did not see only one significant incentive variable. So yes, yeah, we know, yeah, in corporate governance literature, yes, managerial incentives like stock option, it matters to firm performance. Managers are managerial interest is aligned with the stockholders, shareholders' interests. But we did not see any significant effect here, managerial stock option, other incentive variables. So yes, many firms, they prefer to provide these stock options to managers now, but from the viewpoint of our analysis and findings, they may not improve farm performance. So yes, so that's surprising for me.
You know what, Yamanoi Sensei, we should apologize in a way, because the a lot of the items that you looked at for compensation are out of the TSE's corporate governance report data, which are not very high quality when it comes to compensation. You know, we didn't actually go into the weeds on this, Ben and I describing the data. The much more important, meaningful aspect of compensation that does show through as being important in your analysis is this disclosure of director compensation item, which I referred to earlier, which basically is a proxy for, are you paying executives a lot? Are you paying them, you know, more than the average company? And that does show through as something that correlates. So we sort of have to apologize for the low quality of the TSC's corporate governance report compensation data.
So we are running short in time here, and I have more questions than I have time to answer that have been submitted. So let me just do one really quick thing, and I'm going to answer one myself and then ask the last one. That'll be our last question. So thank you very much to our audience for participating today, and I really appreciate the questions. We will be sending out a copy of the paper. It's a working paper, not for distribution, but basically a copy of the paper afterwards for people to review. And please feel free, as all of us here have worked on it in some form or another, as Nick and I are part of the Board Director Training Institute, as Miyakawa Sensei and Yamanoi Sensei are part of Waseda and prolific researchers themselves and very good professors. We love hearing questions and going through additional pieces of the data. So
Absolutely.
the quick question that I'm going to answer myself is, one person asked why there's only 2,000 firms in this data rather than the full set for 3,800 in the Lasso model. And that's an easy one to answer. We're looking at 133 different variables, both financial and corporate governance. And in order for us to put them into Lasso as a regression model itself, and Miyakawa Sensei, please correct me if I've gotten this wrong, but you need data for every single data point, all of the years. So that's 2015 to 2022. So for some companies, and this starts to build up, you might be missing one or two pieces where we cannot assume, if you don't have that piece of data, that you are one answer or another. And so we have to say, okay, well, that one's still blank, it's null. So that particular company is not going to be able to fit within the Lasso regression. So that's just very quickly answering that question. The other question, which will be our last question here, is that the professors, Miyakawa Sensei, Yamanoi Sensei, you pointed to a couple of the factors such as disclosure of compensation, public announcement of compensation policy being important. And I know that we have a few board members themselves on this call. So the question really is there any other key factors that board members should be considering if they're looking at the results of our research? What should boards look at in order to consider doing if they wanted to lift their TSR up?
Okay, so what we are doing here is the simple prediction analysis, meaning like a correlation between today and the future performance. So it's not a causation. So we have to be careful about the interpretation itself. But one casual observation coming from the significant predictor spit out from the Lasso and the OLS result is the kind of composition of the board member. So sometimes I mean, it's not for ourselves, but for example, having the university professor sometimes works well. So it's kind of surprising. I didn't expect that, but I'm exemplified by that. So the composition of the board member seemed to be very important. So instead of taking a look at the one single factor, you may want to take a look at the composition of the board member and how those are working together. That is the one small things I can tell now.
Right. I think, Sensei, just to add to that, I believe also the specialists, which basically means accountants and lawyers, were generally negatively correlated. Isn't that correct?
Yes. So I am not expressly saying that, but
let's not expressly say that. But
as a matter of fact, the lawyer is not working well actually in this exercise. Yeah. So But we should think about how to interpret that result more carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the lawyer.
All right.
Yeah.
Miyakawa, please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, just the related thing. Number of auditors is also negative. You see, so sometimes auditors are just just the addition to the board. You see, they may not work. You see, if the board has larger auditors, you see, it may be negative. So yeah.
Right. Any last words, Nick, before I close this out?
I guess the last word just to add about Yamano-san. But I think you did find, isn't that right, Yamano-san, that the percentage of outside kanseiaku was a positive.
True.
So that was very interesting. Having more kanseiaku is a negative, but having more outside kanseiaku as a ratio is a positive. So there we go. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sometimes, inside you say auditors, we know that they are just a goal of a career. You see, they may not be. I do not want to use the word, but not good enough as a director. But you see, we should promote him as an auditor. So if a firm has such positions in the board a lot, they may be bad for practice in performance. So.
I totally agree. It's the QP prize.
All right. So once again, Miyakawa-sensei, Yamanoi-sensei, thank you very much for joining us today and explaining the preliminary research that we've done. Again, just to stress to the audience, as we just talked about in the past couple of minutes, this is informative. It is very enlightening. It's new, and we are extraordinarily excited to be sharing this and to be able to go through this research. But there's a lot more to be done. So we're looking forward to next steps, and we hope that you contact us or otherwise follow the steps that are to come. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
To the professors. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.